everybody, of course, to the Pro Wrestling Wire podcast. I have a very special guest with me here today. It's the original Dirty White Boy, Jimmy Powell. Jim, how are you?
Hey man, I'm great. How are you?
Awesome. And I want to thank you for coming here today and doing this interview. I've been looking forward to this all week.
Yeah, me too. I don't do a whole lot of these things, but it's kind of cool when somebody asks because I've been out of the business. I got out early, so we just you think, well, nobody remembers anymore. Then somebody will call you, or I'll run into somebody somewhere. But it's pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah. Did you play sports as a kid?
I did not. I actually started wrestling when I was 14 professionally.
That's pretty wild because I guess was there not a legal age where you lived or
Of course.
yeah.
I started out in what we called outlaws back then. Now they call them independents, but I started with outlaws, and I wrestled a little bit because a guy that was running the show, he was a friend of my dad's, and he was a referee, and he promoted the show right down the road from us, and so he knew I loved it, and I'd been training with two or three guys, so he said, "Hey, buy you get you a masked outfit, and I'll let you work." So I had a masked outfit by the next week. Terry Gordy's mom made me my first one because I couldn't order from Carl and Hildegard in time to get it back, so she made me the first one. And
Wow.
then after that, I'd do whatever it took. But it didn't take me too long to get working for Nick, but he didn't care anyway because I had a good wrestling ring. That's what he wanted. So
Yeah, I heard that what did your father build you a ring?
he did. My father and a man here in town they were lifelong friends. He was a welder. He could build anything. He could redo a car, upholster a car. I mean, he could do anything in the world. And Dad told him, says, well, the first match I wrestled on, the ring broke. So Dad said, hey, if you're going to do this, we're going to get you a ring. And I didn't know you could buy rings. Of course, I don't think you even really could much then. They certainly wasn't the high spots. But they started going to some towns and taking his drawing pad and getting there early enough to where they could ease the aprons up and look under them, and and they just kind of drew out a plan.
Yeah, well, that's pretty interesting. I did hear it on another interview that you did that it was switchable from a low boy to like a regulation size, which I find is, a friend of mine actually does own a ring. He lives down the road here, and he rents his ring out, and he has the option to make it a low boy and
Yeah,
his ring, depending on obviously how high the ceiling is or how low the ceiling is in the building. I think that's pretty interesting. You might be the first one though that maybe have done that.
nobody had ever saw it. Even Nick Goulas thought it was, he thought it was cool because he ran studio wrestling still, and he had a ring in all the studios. But there was a time in Chattanooga when the ring had a problem, and I had to bring mine one week, and so it was easy to put in because it was low. So he thought that's pretty cool. But it was.
Is that how you started working out with Nick Goulas?
Uh, where I started working.
Yeah, with him. Is that through like the
Yes,
ring rental and then
it
possibly
was. It was through the ring. Who'd you say, Randall?
which I or
Oh,
maybe
ring
like
rental. Yeah, I'm sorry.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. What happened? I just got home from high school one day. I was 15, so I was still riding the bus, and the phone rang, and this guy that says, "Hey, boy, this is Nick Goulas. You know who I am. And I knew right away. I recognized his voice from television. And I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "Larry Cheatham gave me your number and said you had a ring, and I have somebody that's canceled in Riceville, Tennessee, and can you be there tonight?" And I said, "Well, where at?" And he told me that's high school. And I said, "Yes, sir." And I took the booking, and I didn't even have a driver's license. So I had to call and just scream, force my dad, beg him to come home. And we drove, which Riceville, Tennessee was, it's north of Cleveland, so it's not that far. But it was an hour and a half, I guess, probably time altogether to get there. So I got there and we got the ring set up before the fans got in. So that was my first time. And Nick appreciated that because and especially when he saw how young I was, because he kind of freaked out, but he didn't know. He never asked me how old I was, really. I didn't wrestle that night. My dad ring announced, and I wished I'd have thought, but I have a Pago who is a wrestler. I don't know if you remember him. He was a Samoan wrestler. He was working on that card, And we took one of his 8x10 pictures, turned it over, and we wrote the announcements, the introductions on it. And my dad did the ring introductions that night for him because my dad was an auctioneer, and so he had a great voice, and he wasn't nervous and scared of anything, and so that was it. We got in there that night, and Ripper Collins and Luke Graham were there, and I'd watched them since I was a kid, and I was always
Yeah.
scared to death of Luke Graham, and Ripper freaked me out, so he chased me around the dressing room that night and scared me, and I went out and stayed outside the rest of the night. So
Well, now I'm interested. What were you paid for this? How much were you paid for the ring rental? Being
I
15.
think I think Nick paid about $75 then, I believe, and that was in '77, I guess.
Okay.
Uh, so 75, I believe, was the ring rental, and that was it. I mean, honestly, when I first started, he called me back. Then after I did that, they paid me that night. He wasn't there. Tommy Hercules was working for him, and Hercules paid me, took all my information, and Nick called me the next day and said, "Boy, I just wanted to thank you. I appreciate you being, keeping your word. I hear you're young. You're pretty young." I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "Well, you want to come to Chattanooga TV Saturday?" And I said, "Well, yes, sir." And I didn't ask him about wrestling. I just went, because I got the opportunity. I never thought I could go to Channel 12 in Chattanooga, and so I rode up there, and my dad took me up there, and I went in the back and introduced myself, and Nick had a bad habit of saying GD. He said, "How old are you, boy?" I said, "I'm 18." Of course, I lied to him, and he
Right.
said, "Oh, okay, well, that's fine, okay." And I didn't wrestle that day on TV, but I got to sit in the dressing room and actually Larry Cheatham was there that day, and Cheatham was working for him like Ken Hawk and some of those other guys. Hawk was a manager; he managed off Tio and Tapu, who were the Manchurians or the Samoans, whichever mattered, wherever they're at. And so I knew, I'd met Hawk in outlaw shows too because he worked outlaw too.
Mhm.
And Cheatham did too, and a couple other guys, Ricky Gray and Gene Spurlock. They were guys that had worked a lot of outlaw shows and worked for Nick too. So 3 or 4 weeks later, Ken Hawk brought Pat Rose in there, Pat Smith then, and so I was there that first day, and he worked, and he may have worked for Nick. Actually, wrestled on TV probably before me because Nick knew I was young, and he didn't put me on there for a while.
Right.
But
Right.
he let me work in the house shows or announce or referee or sell tickets, whatever he needed. He'd let me do that when I'd go take the ring. So we ended up making a deal where I
Right.
did Huntsville. Let's see, Florence, Alabama was at the Lauderdale County Coliseum was on Mondays. Huntsville at Von Braun Civic Center was Tuesdays. And now most of the time we ran at the annex behind it. We didn't run the big building all the time. But Wednesdays was Nashville, so I normally didn't go to Nashville because I was still in high school,
Right.
and and I wasn't going to work on the big show anyway, probably or anything. He had a ring up there, so he didn't need me to work with a ring. Thursdays was Bowling Green, I think, and I didn't usually go to Bowling Green. That was too far to get back and go to school the next day. And then Fridays was the house show, and Saturdays was Chattanooga. So
Right. Right. Can you talk about working Tojo and the Blonde Bomb while at the Gulas territory?
yeah, working with Tojo. Tojo was probably one of my favorite people in the world. People have all kinds of opinions of him. I'll tell you what I know. I know him as a guy that treated me like his kid. He was so good to me. I met him at Channel 12. I sat down beside him. I was scared to death. He was my all-time favorite wrestler. Norm Veazey was the ring announcer, and my mother was the tax commissioner in Walker County. Well, she wasn't then. She was just working in the tax office. And Norm would come in there. He owned property in Walker County, so he'd come in to buy his tags, pay his taxes. And my mom told him one day, said, "My son absolutely worships wrestlers. So he loves it." And so he said, "Well, I'll give you some tickets to TV." It didn't cost to get in, but you had to have tickets. So they took me up there. And Norm Veazey, he would walk around the ring and interview fans then. And he interviewed me and asked me who my favorite wrestler was. And Tojo was the heel. And I told him Tojo Yamamoto. And I got booed out of the little arena, boo, out of the studio. But I told Tojo that story sitting beside him, and he looked at me and says, "Don't ever tell that again." And I said, "Why?" He said, "You make me sound old." So I never told it again while I was with him. But he was really good to me. Tojo, I could, man, I was just so young. Most of the guys just beat me up a lot. And there was a couple of old timers that worked in outlaw stuff. A guy named Buddy Young, Buddy Reed. He wrestled as Johnny Marlowe for years, or Buddy Marlowe. And Cowboy Langston, his name was Carl. His real name was Carl Bradley. He's still alive. He's 91. He came to see me not long ago. But they took their time and helped me learn to wrestle. And so I knew the moves,
Mhm.
but I didn't know how to put them together. And I don't know how to make them mean anything. Tojo taught me that. He taught me about facial expression, about selling, because selling was a big thing in Tennessee. If you're a babyface, you could sell, and if you could make a comeback and you could look out at the crowd and invite them in the ring with you, you have them. And Tojo could do it. I mean, he could just look at people. He had contacts and looks, and and when somebody hit him in the jaw, he'd stick his tongue in his jaw and sell it. I mean, you would think that somebody had hit him in the jaw, So he always told me, he says, do things that are real. He said, he made fun of my hands because I got small hands. He said, make a fist. I made a fist. He says, that fist couldn't hurt anybody. He says, people know that. He said, hit them with a forearm. Don't, punch when you have to, but don't use it as your main thing. And he said, get them in Holt, learn to use Holtz, but use your face. So he was just really good to me. When I got in summertime, I went to Ringo High School, and I would get out of school in the summer, of course, like everybody. And I went and moved to Nashville, and I just working, and I was living in a hotel up there, an old motel. And Ann Jeanette was living there. She was a lady wrestler at the time. She was just a rough old gal, but she was good to me. And Tojo lived down the street, so he would come by and pick me up. So he come by one day and says, have you called your mama? I said, no. He said, get in. And he took me to the payphone, and he says, call your mama. And you tell her that you're okay. Don't you ever not call home. And so he called mom one time. We was talking about, I was down at her house yesterday, and I was telling her I was going to do this podcast, and she was laughing. She said she remembered the two times she thought was the funniest was when Tojo called her to tell her I was okay, and when Nick Goulas called her to ask her why she didn't apparently at one time he had a house in Hawaii, and her and her cousin went to Hawaii on vacation, and so Nick called her to ask her why that she didn't tell him so she could stay at his house. I don't know. I mean, I guess he had one. I don't know. You can't ever tell about Nick, but he told her, "You could have stayed for free."
I
So
oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead. That's all right.
Well, I interviewed Reno Riggins a number of years ago, probably 2 years ago, and he has some funny stories about being trained by Tojo Yamamoto,
Yeah,
basically making him run the Nashville Fairgrounds for probably weeks at a time until he was throwing up and then I think it was like, close to 3 weeks before he actually let him in the ring or something like that.
sure.
And he said he
I
was,
mean, that was normal, though, really.
yeah,
And that's why I laughed when I heard years ago about the guy in Florida that was working for the performance center that they fired. I mean, I ain't taking up for what he did. I don't know how he treated people, but man, I'm gonna tell you what, those guys used to make me run the ropes for an hour until I couldn't pick my feet up, and then get up on the top turnbuckle and flip off and take bumps back, and I would throw up, and they would laugh, and then they'd make me do it again. I mean, that's just the way it was. They won't know if you didn't have the guts to take it, they didn't want you, and
yeah,
they could tell your love. Tojo was hard, man. I'm telling you, he was hard on people. I've heard a lot of people tell me their stories, and he didn't break me in the business, so I didn't see all of that. But he was tough at times. But you know what? I always thought it was just because he cared about the business. He loved the business. And he told me one time, I had this kid that was in Chattanooga that he was a big mark, and he was a good looking kid, but he was he was at the matches every week. He loved the Blonde Bombers. He loved the Hills. So Nick Goulas hated him, and Tojo hated him because he didn't play the game. He was a fan that liked Hills. So he was smart. I mean, come on. But he wasn't smart. Nobody had smartened him up. But he knew. They'd go to Handy Andy on outside of Chattanooga there, and they'd have matches at Handy Andy because that's where Wayne Ferris and Larry Latham would stop and get beer on the way back to Nashville. So they'd go to there and they'd have a match out there and they'd get juice, and they had a handy Andy championship. And so I told them, I said, look, y'all got to quit this. And so I let them put my ring up with me. And then I trained Jeff. Jeff was a bodybuilder. He was a good looking guy. Jeff Kokoska was his name. And I trained him, and he started putting a ring up with him. And Dojo told me one day, he says, you understand, Jimmy, it's very easy to pull the trigger on a gun. He says, you don't smarten people up, just to smarten them up. I said, Tojo, he was smart already.
Yeah.
I said, y'all don't understand this. These kids already knew it. They just didn't know the lingo. I said, they're smart, and they're not telling anybody now because they know, they understand that what kayfabe means. I said, they didn't understand before, and that's telling everybody. I said, now they're taking up for the business. They're putting a ring up with me. Jeff's going to, and Nick hired Jeff as a referee. And then later, Ole Anderson gave him a job in championship wrestling from Georgia for a short time. He stuttered. He had a stuttering speaking impediment. And Ole, of course, was a pain in the rear end sometime. And he made fun of him for stuttering and ended up, firing him, I guess. But he told me that he was stupid. And I said, he's not stupid. He just stutters, But anyway, Jeff was a good kid. But Tojo was really serious. I mean, he's, so back then it was different.
Yeah.
And I respected that,
Yeah.
I understood it.
Speaking of which, you were telling me, you mentioned that, nobody really ever got, smartening people up. And I was talking to Mario Mancini, former WWF talent, if you remember, a good friend of mine. And he mentioned that he didn't find out until he got to the arena for his first match when they were discussing, I think it was Greg Valentine was his first opponent, I think. And when they said that he was going over, he just goes, like it hit him right then at that moment that it was work. Yeah.
There were a lot of people like that. I wasn't one. And I'll be honest with you, the reason that the office guys didn't like the outlaw guys a lot of times, because the outlaw guys would smarten people up faster. They would train a lot of people and things like that. So I was around that. Terry Gordy's uncle, Captain Hook, J.D. Kyle, was an outlaw wrestling promoter. And he was the one that rented my dad's building that got me kind of hooked up with Terry. And, so JD had promised to train me. Well, he didn't, and Cowboy and those guys did because they knew I loved it. And then I kind of fell in with Terry at that point because he'd quit high school and went to Nova Scotia. And, he was 16, I think, when he went to Nova Scotia. So when he came back, me and him become really close friends for the rest of his life. It was different. I've had people tell me that they didn't learn Bobby Simmons. Do you know Bobby Simmons?
The name sounds familiar.
Bobby Simmons started working for Georgia Championship Wrestling at the old auditorium in Atlanta as taking up tickets. He was 14 and he got a job. He was just living right down the street in Cabbagetown, so he would walk. And they hired him. He asked for a job. They hired him. When Bobby quit, he was the office manager for Georgia Championship Wrestling, signing the checks for Jim Barnett. I mean, he had been with him for years. Me and Bobby had been friends forever. But Bobby told me that when he refereed, Jody Hamilton and those guys and Tom Ernesto were there, and they didn't smarten him up. They just told him to call it right down the line. And he did that for a while until, a problem came up one day and they had to tell him something. They had to smarten him up about something, But he was just young, But that's the way it was. I mean, I guess those guys could work around anything.
Right.
I worked for Tom Ernesto when he was booking for Nick, but I worked for Jody Hamilton when he ran Deep South. And I have huge respect for both those men. They were both very, very brilliant. I mean, they were just great bookers to learn from. And,
can you talk about working Deep South in your time there? I don't know a lot about it. Some of that footage is kind of hard to come by these days. It's real grainy on YouTube. And I actually dug pretty deep into Deep South, whatever footage was on there not so long ago. And it seemed like it's a very underrated territory and doesn't get the recognition that it really deserves, today by people doing podcasts like this, talking about the memories and stuff.
The thing about it is that it was after WWE had bought a lot of the territory, or not bought them, but just closed them down pretty much. And there was a bunch of guys left that weren't under contract to Turner or to McMahon. And so that's how Jody just started. I mean, Jody said, we're in the Deep South. And I didn't start at the beginning with him. But he had everybody. He had Brody. He one of the smartest bookers I think that was ever in the world. I guess Buck Robley.
Right.
Buck was a talented wrestler. He was so believable looking, but he just didn't look that great. But his moves were just, everything he did looked real. But he was so smart at building talent, working angles. And he had Buck there and Brody at the same time, and Abdullah and Dick Slater and, Joel Deaton, which I think was an underrated, great talent. And Hoss, who wrestled his brother, he was really good too. But Joel, to me, was one of the all-time great. I love Joel. But we had, he had a lot of guys. And then he had some local guys like Ted Allen and Billy Starr, who were the Mass Nightmares. And that's how I got there. They had work, Billy Starr started booking for Jody. And Ted was leaving. Ted, I don't know why. Me and Ted was friends till the day he died. I preached his funeral. But Ted and I, he was leaving. He was going to work for Jerry Blackwell because Jerry had started running too. And so let's see, I had Billy Starr teaming with me for a while. And I actually called him the Dirty White Boy with me. And so when Ann Gunkel started running again, Billy went to work for Ann Gunkel as the Dirty White Boy while I was out in Texas working for the Von Erichs. So now I wasn't the Dirty White Boy out there. So somebody told me, hey, there's a Dirty White Boy in Atlanta. And I'm like, who? And then I found out it was Billy. But Billy was booking for Jody. So he calls me and says, hey, man, I got this deal for you if you want to think about it. I said, what is it? He said, well, Ted's my partner, And I said, yeah, I know. He said, well, he's quitting. And he said, man, I don't know why he's quitting. Says, Jody, just give me the book. And, it's a great opportunity. And says, I really, I need a partner. And I said, Billy, I don't like working with it. He said, I know you don't. But he said, I really think we could do some business. And I said, well, Bill, I'll tell you what. I said, I'm really not working. I don't really have a place that I'm actually happy with going to right now. I said, I'll come down and work. And he said, okay. He said, but you got to make a commitment to me now. If I start this, we don't want another nightmare in 4 weeks, I said, yeah, okay, I will. I'll commit to you. He said, will you give me 6 months at least? I said, yeah. So we did the day before I was going to Savannah to start as the Nightmares. He called me back and he said, hey, I got a problem. I said, what's the problem, Bill? He said, we got Tommy Rich booked against Jerry Lawler in Savannah. And they've been working that angle in Memphis. And I said, yeah. He said, we got him in a hair versus hair match in Savannah. And I said, well, what's the problem? He said, Lawler's not coming. And I said, well, what does that have to do with me? He said, well, I told the old man, talking about Jody, I told the old man that you could do anything. And I said, what do you mean I could do anything? He said, you can be a Lawler. I said, Billy, come on. I said, I don't like doing that kind of stuff, And he said, for enough money, will you? I said, yeah. Tell the old man to call me. So Jody called me and offered me $500.
Okay.
That was a lot of money.
Yeah.
That was pretty good payoff, plus my other payoff. And I knew I was coming in, and I knew if I did this favor for him that I was in. And I said, I'll do that. So I worked as Jim Lawler against Tommy Rich, and Tommy beat me, and then he shaved my head, cut the top of my head off with a stupid. He had like a horse razor, on them big old sheep cut shear or something, about this long. It was, and he stuck it in my head. He thought it was so funny. He laughed, But so anyway, I ended up. They shaved my head. I went back in the back and went ahead and fixed it, put the hood on, and worked as a Nightmare that night. And a guy was in.
Yeah.
Billy was not the greatest booker. Actually, Billy was a good booker, but
right.
We didn't have. Tommy was a babyface, and they turned Tommy heel, and they kept trying to find the baby face, and they never could find it. So Billy had this idea to do what Tom and Jody had done years back with the Assassins thing: me unmasked on TV, turn baby face, and us work. And I begged him. I said, "Look, Billy," I said, "I'm not the guy to carry this company. They don't know the dirty white boy. They don't care about me." He said, "But we'll make them care about you." And Jody went for it, and I did it, and it got over, but it didn't get over to be the main event.
Right.
We needed somebody, we needed another Tommy Rich, or, we had wrestling too, but he's in a tag match with Ranger Ross, so we needed a guy on the front line. And at the time, it just wasn't there. And I was not the guy, and it didn't work. I mean, houses just didn't do what they should have done. And I really felt bad, because I was getting a push as the top baby face, and I wasn't drawing, you know. We were drawing, but I wasn't drawing what I felt like we should. And, we were making, the last night I quit and making, there's about 250, 300 people in that Coliseum. And me and Billy were in the cage. Billy wanted me to get juice in the cage. And I said, "Billy, I'm not getting juice tonight." I said, "This is my last night." I said, I'm embarrassed. I love you. And I went and talked to Jody already. I said, he understands. And I said, I'm going to move on.
Not in front of 300 people or whatever.
Yeah. And you know what I did? I went out there and got juice for him anyway. I did everything he asked me to do. And Jody paid me that night. Jody Hamilton was as honest as payoff guy to me as anybody. He was an honest man. Nick Patrick and I saw him at Charlie Smith's funerals. First time I'd seen him in quite a while. We had a great time talking. I love Nick. He's a good guy. And Nick was nice to me when I started, when I was 18 years old in Georgia Championship Wrestling. I was pulling the ring for them. That's how I got in down there. But so Nick South was good. They had some good talent. I mean, to me, Wrestling 2 and Ranger Ross was as good a babyface team as they could have been at that time. They were over like crazy. And when they were working with me and Billy, it was really good,
Yeah, I didn't know he was there. I think I saw him in
Who's that? Ross?
Ranger Ross. I saw
Yeah,
him
he
in
started there. Yeah, Ted Allen
okay.
trained him. So
Oh,
he
really?
started there. Yeah.
I thought I saw him at Continental first, and then
No, he went over there. And now he might have went over there and done TV because Ted was taking
TV.
He was taking Continental for TV. But but Ross started there, and he was a good hand. I saw him. He spoke at my church last year. So I love Robert. He's a good guy.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I was wondering about him because it's like he seems to be a guy. Is he on social media at all?
No.
Range? No, that's what I thought. Yeah.
No.
So, and he of course he had that run in WCW for quite some time too. And
he had some deals going on after that. Some legal stuff, and and he kind of pulled away. And I'll tell you what, it made him the best. You could have never paid me enough to believe what the charges were, and I won't talk about him no further than that. But he was one of the best men I ever knew in my life. He's just a good guy. Just made some dumb decisions. So
well, everybody does
something. We all do.
Exactly.
Yeah. If there had been cell phones back then, I'd still be in prison.
What else was I going to say? I had somewhere. Oh, you mentioned World Class, and I was a huge World Class fan growing up because I got it on television up here. I live in Connecticut. It was on ESPN, and I watched it. It was on every day after school, and I raced home every day. Forget my work. I sat in front of the television watching World Class.
Wow.
That's how much I was kind of obsessed with wrestling at that time period in my life. So, and it was just amazing. So tell me about the the Von Erichs working there and the whole atmosphere and stuff.
Okay. Well, I got there. I had actually quit. The one time I quit wrestling for a little while, a buddy of mine ran an ink company in Atlanta, and I had saw him at Marietta, Cobb County Civic Center, and he said, I'd known him all my life. He's an older guy, and he said, if you ever want to get out of this stuff and get a regular paying job, he said, I've got a really good company, and they pay really good. And I said, okay. I just took his number and stuck it in my pocket, never thought about it. Well, it got to the point and I was ready to get out for a little while. So I moved to Atlanta, and I had the only real job I ever had in my life, working for somebody else, and I hated it the whole time. It was good. It paid a lot better than wrestling at times. Other times, wrestling paid better. But I met my wife in Atlanta, so I'm glad I was living there. And we met in July, married in December, and we've been married 42 years. But she's I had I married her, and then we said, her mom and dad knew I was a wrestler, but they knew I had a good job, so they was tickled about the good job, because their other son-in-law was a wrestler, and he worked half, he didn't work much. So anyway, Michael Hayes called me, and he said, "You still got your ring?" I said, "Yeah." And so he says, "Well, I want to train two guys. Can we do that?" I said, "Yeah, yeah." So we set it up in Ronnie's backyard. That was right before I got married. We set it up in Ronnie Campbell's backyard, and he brought these two guys over. One's name was Rick Hazard, and one's name was John Finkel, John Tatum. So we started working out with them, and we trained them in my backyard. So Rick Hazard went out to do TV in Texas. Well, they got out there and they needed a referee. So they hired him. He got a job, and Rick was really good. And he was such a nice guy, too. I mean, they could depend on him. I don't think Rick drank or anything. I think he was just straight as an arrow. And if I need to look at the camera instead of your face, you can tell me. But so they got out there, and then Tatum got a job out there. And so Tatum had met Missy, and I had met Missy years before that, but that we didn't have any kind of relationship. Of course, I knew her. So I told them, I said, "Man, I'm sick of this ink company. Every day I go home, have to take an hour, hot bath to get the ink pigments out of my skin. I hate this junk." Tatum said, "Well, man, we owe you a big one. Let us talk to the office." So Rick Hazard called me back. And he says, "Hey," he says, "I talked to them, and they're interested in bringing you out here." And I said, "Okay." So they told me, they said, "You work first matches. That's all. You probably won't ever go no further than that. Probably won't be but 6 months. But after you leave here, we'll try to get you something better. And, you probably home every night by 9:30, 10 o'clock. And I was making around $1,400 a week.
Wow.
And, because it was so crazy. It was
Yeah.
like walking into rock shows. I mean, everywhere Von Erich was, there was crowds. Terry told me it was going to be like that. He said, "Man, they just left out there." He said, "Man, I'm telling you, it's the craziest thing you ever seen." He said, "It's like you're in Hollywood." He said, "It's like you're at a rock concert ever." And so that's the way it was. And so they were running close towns. You wasn't running far towns because honestly, the boys didn't need to drive far.
Right.
The sons, so they didn't. And so we ran close. I was home every night. My wife was with me, 9:30, 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
And of course, then we'd leave and go to the bar, like an idiot. But that's just how it was. And it was, got to work with all of Chris, just left me. The English guy, Chris
Oh,
Adams.
Chris Adams. Chris Adams. Yeah.
Chris, I got to work with him some. I always seen him. He was stiff as a board, but he was good. All the guys were stiff because they all had to work with the Von Erichs, and you had to beat those guys to death. I never got in the ring with any of them. Never. I don't. I just wasn't in their class. They were up here and I was down here. And I understood that, and but it was crazy. I thought when I got Sportatorium, I have made it in the wrestling business. And then I nearly lost my pickup in a pothole. I mean, that place was a dump, but it was great. I mean, it was like, oh man, it's like me. I wrestled in Chattanooga at the Memorial Auditorium. That's where I went to see wrestling every week. And my first time there, I wrestled David Schultz. He beat me to death in 3 minutes. And it was the best 3 minutes of my life because I got to wrestle at the auditorium. So that's kind of the way it was. It was a Sportatorium. You saw it on television, it was, and it was just, but seriously, it was a dump, and, but it was so cool.
I've heard it was dumpy. I heard there was like a big hole under the ring. What else? I heard there was rats in the ring, like not
Rats.
rats, like rats all over the building. Like, just, yeah. I've heard, multiple people that have said that they've worked there that like some of the descriptions were just, but I guess there was a certain atmosphere that it had, that it was like an awesome atmosphere.
The crowds were crazy. The dressing rooms were under the bleachers. You could hear when somebody got heat, everybody knew it because they were stomping their feet and going nuts, and you could hear. I mean, it was just the greatest place in the world. Bobby Fulton the other day commented about somewhere that how great it was, and I'm thinking, yeah, I know that's true. It was a dump, but it was the greatest place in the world. So I mean, it's like going to Tampa and doing TV. You go in there and it's this little bitty store building that from the outside I couldn't even imagine they could got a ring in it hardly. But it's just a lot of those places were like that. Dallas was good. I got to work with Scott Casey a lot. I liked Scott. Uh, and let's see, Nick Kaninsky,
I
uh,
remember.
and his brother. I forgot his brother's name.
It was Kelly, right? Kelly
Kelly.
Kenneth?
Kelly was in Dallas. Nick was in San Antonio. Okay, so I was in with Kelly first, and but I just did 2 or 3 TVs. Honestly, I don't think I was ever on TV more than 2 or 3 times. Uh, if I was, I've never found any of them. I worked with Kelly, and then Kelly left. So, and he was mad because I was taking his place, but I don't know why, because he was leaving. But so he was pretty rough, but
Did,
it was
didn't he
okay.
go to the AWA or
I
something?
think he did.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah. So, but he went up there. I don't think he stayed long. But anyway, the one match I found on that network, the WWE network or whatever it was, used to be on, was me and Tommy Higgy, who was Tommy Montana. And that was actually my last TV there because Tommy was coming in to take my place. So they told me the truth. I wasn't going to stay a long time. Terry called me and told me I would have stayed longer if I went to the gym. And
I came across that match actually yesterday. So
yeah,
as
I
you
was so
said,
arrogant. I said, go to the gym. I've been laying out by the pool, and I'm a dirty white boy. I don't like a tan, but I said I'm laying out by the pool, and and so he said, Jimbo, man, everybody's not 6'3", 300 pounds. He said you gotta go to the gym, and by then they'd already given me my notice anyway. So they sent me to San Antonio and about starved me to death. So
yeah. So Texas All Star Wrestling was
yeah, yeah.
yeah. And I heard that was not a very good place to work, I guess, for a payday.
It was terrible for a payday. I mean, they would bring in all the biggest guys in the world and pay them, but they'd not pay none of the regular guys. Uh, and Fred Barron everybody talks about Nick Gulas was the worst payoff man in the wrestling business. Apparently, they didn't work for Fred Barron because Fred Barron was terrible. I went from making that $1,400 a week or something, to making $350 and driving from San Antonio to Odessa, 7 hours one way for $40. And yes, sir. And I wasn't the only one getting 40. Mike Golan was out there. He was getting 40. Fred Ottman was there. Now, Fred was on a guarantee. He's probably getting 100. Shawn Michaels was there, but that was one of his first places too. So he wasn't getting a whole lot, and Paul Diamond and those guys there, and nobody was getting any money. And
Right.
Al Madrill was booking because Chavo was his booker and Chavo was in Japan. So Al was his assistant. So I was booking. Al was getting probably 6,500, maybe, I don't know, but it was pitiful, and I was hungry. I was tired. My wife was with me, and we were living in a dump with a guy named J.R. Hogg. I don't know if you ever knew him, but he was from Ohio area. J.R. was a really nice guy, but he did not take a lot of baths and wash a lot of clothes. And we had to sleep on his in his floor because he had the bedroom. So me and my wife slept on the floor. And if it would have been for some Hispanic ladies that lived there, inviting Tracy over and sending us food, we'd probably starved. Uh, and I mean, they found out that I'd run towns. So they talked to Fred Barron and let me run a town. So he'd give me the map and said, pick out the town. Well, I didn't know anything about Texas. So I picked out a town. And we ended up drawing like $3,800, which was a big house show then.
Right.
And I was supposed to got a percentage. And so I got my check that week. It's $350 again. So I wadded it up. I walked into the office. I wadded it up in a tight wad and threw it and hit him right between the eyes. And I said, Fred, I can sell peanuts on the streets in Georgia and make more money than this. You can take this whole operation and stick it where the sun don't shine. And Chavo was back. He'd been there a week. So he worked in the town that I ran and knew it was drawing. And some of the other towns was drawing like $1,500, $1,200. And so, we was running Corpus Christi and it wasn't doing but like 18 or 2,000. unless he brought in Brody or Abdullah, and then they got all the money. So I just they Al grabbed my check and took it away from Fred and unfolded it, straightened it back up, brought it back. Here's Jim. We'll make sure he takes care of you. And I said, if he'll do it once, he'll do it again. Al, I love you. Have a good life. And I left. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I really wasn't there long.
Yeah. What was it like working with Al Madrill? Because I was a fan of his. I still am a fan of his, but it's like you don't ever hear him get mentioned, really, very rarely. And I think that he was super talented. He was a great heel when he was working in Dallas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Al was I'm a fan of his too. They tell me that he will not do anything wrestling related whatsoever. That's what I heard. He's still alive, but he would not do anything. Uh, he was he was a smart guy and a good guy. And he rode with us sometime because we would rent a car because it's such long trips. And you could rent a Lincoln Town car for like $35. And then, so you can put 6 or 8 guys in it if you crammed them in. And, you know, so you really didn't have that much in the vehicle and you didn't wear yours out. So we'd do that. And then when Chavo got back, I rode with him because he was on a guarantee and he'd drive 150 miles an hour. So it didn't take long to get back. But Al was such a good guy. I liked him. Some people didn't, I guess, but from the day one, he involved me in my matches. He didn't just come in there and say, hey, I say day 2. Day 1, he did. Day 2, I think he saw that I wasn't a great wrestler, but I had psychology. I knew how to reach the crowd and I knew how to, get people going, how to draw. I could talk people into things, So he always involved me and he didn't just beat me. He'd work me in deals, and give me some spots where I could actually, if the territory would have been decent or if it had the potential of a promoter that would let it be decent, we could have, I think I would have stayed because it was just, I love the Hispanic population down there. I'm going to be honest with you. They were the most family-oriented people I'd ever met. They were good to us. They were so sweet to me and Tracy. The ladies around the apartments were, and the Hispanic wrestlers, they would stop in to take you into somebody's house that looked like a house, but it was really a restaurant. And, you'd eat menudo and junk that I would have never eaten anywhere else. So they were just greatest people in the world.
Right. We mentioned Jerry Blackwell earlier and working Southern Championship Wrestling, working as the Nightmares with Ted Allen. And you guys ran an angle there where Ted Allen turned on you.
Yeah.
And I watched that last night, actually. So I thought it was very interesting. I thought it was great, actually. It was very well done. And he beat the crap out of you with your flag or the flag pole. And just, I was talking to Roger Sartain, excuse me, who said that Ted Allen was probably one of the greatest professional wrestlers that ever, and you don't ever hear his name. And I was just like, it kind of makes sense. So, teaming with Ted and feuding with him, how was that with you? How did you like that?
I loved it. I tell you, I love Ted. I mean, we were friends forever. Ted trained a ton of guys. Ted was such a tightwad that, he would charge you 2.5 cents a mile and figure the half a cent. Him and Mike Jackson were 2 of the tightest people I'd ever met in my life. But Ted was good. He was good to me. I was good to him. I came to Blackwell. I left Poughkeepsie, New York, and through Rochester, New Hampshire. Virginia. I was in Virginia last, working for a circus company. I got a guy named Randall Brown and got me hooked up with it. And I was doing that for a little while, and it was a bigger scam than anything I'd ever done in wrestling. It was like ticket sales, and it's supposed to have been for charities, and it wasn't, and all that stuff. So I was so discouraged that I came home and I called Tommy Rich. I called Tommy, and I knew Tommy was helping Jerry. Tommy, this is probably the only time Tommy ever did any booking. He was kind of helping him a little. And he said, well, ride down to Alpharetta. We're doing TV. So I rode down there, and I sat in the truck with him, and he had 3 hours of TV, and he had the first hour figured, and he was trying to get the second hour, and I helped him with it. The third hour, I pretty much did it. And so ended up, Jerry called me and asked me to take the book. And I mean, that's all I ever wanted to do anyway. I love coming up with angles. So I'd done it in all the small towns and outlaw shows and everything, you know. So I did. I told him, I said, I don't want to take Tommy's job. He says, Tommy told me to call you. He said, he don't want to do that. He just wants to wrestle. I said, okay. So me and my brother loaded up, went to come in Georgia and met with Jerry. And Jerry was such a sweet guy. But I booked there for 4 months, probably without wrestling. I didn't really know that I was going to wrestle. Finally, Jerry told me, he says, look, he says, I need you to book yourself on top. And I said, I don't want to book myself on top, Jerry. I said, I've worked for too many bookers that push themselves. He said, Jimmy, you don't understand. A promoter takes his booker and pushes him because he can count on him.
Right.
I got to have somebody I can count on. And so I said, well, I'm not going to be in a single match. I've done tried that with Billy, and I said, I'm not going to do that, but I'll do a tag match. I said, I'll team with Ted Allen. He said, okay. Jerry was so easy. And so Ted was the Nightmare, and I was the Dirty White Boy. And we did a deal where we started teaming, and Joe Pedicino was there. And so Joe one week said, man, these guys are hot. They got as much energy as Georgia Power. And when he said that, it kind of stuck. And that's what they started calling us, is Georgia Power. And it got over. And so me and Ted were a good team. I've never been a good wrestler. I'm just going to tell you. I would never pretend that I was. And in a real fight, if wrestling was real, I'd never been in it. You know, I mean, I'm just being honest with you. But I could talk and I could sell, and I had fire in my comebacks. That's all I had. So Ted could not talk. He couldn't say poop with a mouthful of it. I mean, Ted, you know, he'd do the same interview over and over. I tell you, we're going. I mean, just monotone, you know. And so I would do the talking, and Ted could wrestle like crazy. And he could get in there and he'd sell and he'd do all this stuff, you know, give me the tag and I'd come in like a wild man, you know. Or if I sold, I'd be like at the crowd, you know, and give him the tag and he'd come in and do all the bump wrestling stuff. It got over. We were drawing money, really good money, in an independent company that was running 5 nights a week, though. I mean, yeah, we were running just about at least 5. And so we had Randy Rose, we had Tommy Rich, we had Ivan Koloff was coming in and working part-time. You know, even Mike Hayes came down and did a couple of things for us just to kind of give us a rub, you know. But we had Tony Zane, who was Tony Stansel, was Mr. Atlanta under a mask. And I'm going to tell you, he's one of the best big men I ever saw. He could go.
Yeah.
And him and a guy named David Young, who was from Rome, they were all Marty Lundy, Arn Anderson's best buddies in school. And Ted trained them all 3 at the same time. And they were good, just extra good. All 3 of them were. David never wanted to go anywhere. He was very happy doing local shows. Tony would have been around the world if he could. He just didn't like the rest of us. He had a few problems now and then. But, and so Arn got the rub. He got down to Pensacola, and, you know, and then somebody saw him and told Lowly about him, you know, so. But Pensacola and then Watts, I think, then down there, whatever it was. But anyway, you know, there was just such good talent. And then we had David Sammartino Jr. Well, David Sammartino, yeah. And let's see, Joel Deaton. And then there's some local guys, a guy named Steve Lawler, who was
I remember him, yeah.
Great heel, tough as nails. You couldn't hurt him. Dino Manelli was his partner. And Dino I never realized how good Dino was, so I watched some tapes back a few years ago. And I worked with him. But we worked a lot, Timmy and Ted, but it was fun to work with him. I'll tell you what, the dumbest thing we ever did was doing that angle you saw.
Okay.
It didn't drop.
Really?
It was I'll tell you, and I don't like to brag on me, but my interview that day was probably as good an interview as anybody's ever done about somebody turning on, because it was real. It was personal. I'd been to Ted's family reunions. I'd done all these things. He had been to my house. He knew my mama, you know. So that's what I did. I did an interview, a real interview like that. And it was great, except people just didn't want to see us fight each other. It didn't matter what he did. And the only reason we did it was because he was such a tightwad that in his towns, he didn't want to book a main event. He wanted us to work each other. I mean, I'll just tell you, I loved him, but that's the way he was. He talked me into it, and I should not have let him talk me into it. We didn't stay. We worked 4 or 5 weeks and went right back to teaming. You know, he came in and saved me one night, or I saved him. I can't remember, but anyway, we went right back as Georgia Power because we had to. It wasn't wrong. I mean, Ted was saying, "Oh, give it time, give it time." I'm saying, Ted, you just want to pay. You don't want to pay these guys. He went and booked one of the managers, Sammy Kent, because he had to pay him $50. He'd book another guy that could pay 15. You know, to manage. And again, I'm not knocking. I'm not saying anything about Ted that most of the guys that was around him don't know. He was the greatest guy in the world. He had he was a great wrestler, but he was a sneaking tightwad. I mean, I totaled his 280Z one time, and I paid for it. The insurance company paid for it, and then he sold it to somebody else after, so he got paid 3 times for it. That was in Dothan. Yeah.
What about you work for, I mean, well, Joe Pedicino eventually took the company over, correct?
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
Joe was kind of all over the place, I guess you could say. Different companies he's owned. Of course, there was the global fiasco and stuff like that with those investors and stuff. But, do you have any opinions on Joe Pedicino, and was his wife there at the time, Bonnie Blackstone?
Bonnie was there. Listen, Joe's dead. The dumbest thing I ever did was help Joe take Jerry Blackwell's territory.
Mm.
That was the sorriest thing I ever did in my life, probably. And Jerry never got mad. We met with him one day. Joe had these grand ideas about global and about taking everything big. And you know what? I bought it. I fell for it. And he's just serious. I think he really thought he could do it. But Jerry was the best man, the best guy I ever worked for. Period. He is the best-hearted man I've ever known. He allowed me to do anything. He never questioned. The only time he ever got on to me was when I paid Wrestling 2 an opening match payoff when he's supposed to get a $200 night guarantee because he wanted to work the first match and leave and go to another town and get another payoff. And I gave him that $50. And Jerry said, "Don't ever do Johnny that way again." Or John. He didn't call him John. He said, "Don't ever do John that way again." I said, "Okay." I didn't. He said, "I paid him $150. But Jerry paid me crazy money at times. He gave me percentages of towns. We were drawing some big houses, and he'd split it with me. I mean, what was left over, he gave me $1,500 in Chatsworth, Georgia. If you look on the map at Chatsworth, Georgia, it's tiny. But at the junior high school, we drew $5,800, which was crazy then. And at the end of the payoffs, there was $3,000 left. He gave me $1,500. I've never had anybody do that in my life.
Wow.
And so I love Jerry, and I messed up. And when we went to talk to Jerry, Joe told him, says, "Look, Jerry, next week I'm going to be running the TV." And Jerry said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah." He looked at me, and he looked back at Joe and said, "Okay. That's it."
Okay.
I don't know that he ever said anything bad about us. And I felt so bad 6 weeks later. And when Jerry died, I went and seen Nellie, his wife, and told her, I said, I should have been up here to talk to Jerry, but I want you to know that I'm so sorry for what I did. She said, "He never held it against you." But he was just a good man.
Yeah.
But Joe was a good guy.
Yeah.
He came up with the Georgia Power idea that made me some money. But he had some crazy ideas and some investors that were either non-existent or I don't know. Jerry, I was in Memphis. I went up there for just a few weeks, and I was riding with Jeff. And so Jeff asked me about Joe, and apparently Joe had been meeting with Jerry and all this, and Joe was going to buy Jerry's mansion in Hendersonville.
Interesting. Yeah.
I stepped in and said, "That's the stupidest thing I ever heard." And he said, "Well, why don't you tell my dad that?" And so that night in Nashville, he called his dad in there, and I told him, I said, I don't think that's real. I don't think that's going to happen. He said, why don't you say that? I said, "Well, here's my experience." And I told him, and that was all later on, he said, I saw an interview with Jerry, and I don't think, maybe it's just because he was older and he forgot it, but he said he never had any problems with Joe or something like that. And he never knew that Joe wasn't legitimately he didn't have the backers he's supposed to have. And I can only say that He knew at one time because I told him. But now I was just a punk, and he probably didn't think I knew what I was talking about.
Did Joe ever, did you ever, was there ever a chance that he might have brought you into Global?
I don't think so.
No, no,
That was part of the deal.
right,
That I never once worked there. He brought Billy Starr in as Festus, which
right,
was Steve. I loved Billy, and I brought him into Southern as beautiful or handsome Billy,
right,
and he was the ugliest. My butt would make him a Sunday face. He was the ugliest man that ever walked, and he dipped tobacco all his life. He had rotten teeth. He could wrestle like everything, but he was ugly. And so that's why I said, we're going to call you Handsome Billy, and we're going to get tons of heat, and we're going to draw some money. So I worked an angle with him in wrestling too, and they got over. But then Joe said, well, listen, let's give him another, because he wanted to do WWF stuff. He said,
right.
let's give him another personality. Let's have a split personality. And I'm like, that's stupid. I said, we can do stupid stuff without it being ridiculous, So we can do characters without it and still make it like it's real. And he said, no, let's do this with Festus. So Billy went for it because he just wanted the bookings. And I understand that. And Joe promised him, the moon, I guess. So he did the Festus thing and ended up finishing probably his wrestling career with Festus. But to me, it was probably one of the, worst ideas I'd ever seen.
Right, right.
Yeah.
You mentioned you went to Memphis, right? For you're talking about Jeff Jarrett and stuff, working with Jeff Jarrett, Billy Joe Travis, and the
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't stay long there. uh, I'll be honest with you. I always wanted to be a wrestler, but I wanted to make a good living at it.
right,
I did not want to just be a wrestler. And I didn't. Nick told me something when I was about 17 or 18. He said, boy, do you want to be a star or do you want to make money? Well, I wanted to do both. And I thought should be compensated well for it. And so Ted had told me before, if you'd get off your high horse and quit asking for a $150 a night guarantee, we'd get more bookings. And I said, well, Ted, I'll tell you what, I can get 4 a week at 150, or I can get 7 a week at 50. And I said, you do the math, So I went over there. I liked it. It was fun. And I'm
mhm,
going to tell you, Ronnie Gossett was there. Ronnie Gossett was my best friend. Now, some people might doubt my brains and that, but me and Ronnie were really close. I loved him. Uh, we'd been friends since I started with Nick Goulas. He was I wasn't making $15 working for Nick, and Ronnie got me set up with some bookie that I delivered the numbers for him when I was gambling. So I made $100 every time I delivered. So I knew Ronnie was a crook, but I liked him, and he was good to me, and I was good to him. And he called me. First time I ever heard of people having it. I guess anybody ever called me on a car phone or a box phone or bag phone, I guess it was. They called me. Him and Jeff was coming back from a town, Louisville, I think. Yeah, Louisville. That was Tuesday. Called me on Tuesday night about 2:00 in the morning. My phone rings, and it's Ronnie. I said, "What?" I said, "I'm in bed. What are you doing?" He said, "I'm riding down the road with Jeff Jarrett. We're talking on his car phone. Have you ever talked on a car phone before?" And I said, "No." He said, "Well, Jeff wants to talk to you." And I said, "Ronnie, don't give me this junk." He said, "No, I'm serious. It's Jeff." And so he gets on the phone. "Hey, this is Jeff Jarrett." I said, "Yeah, okay. Well, it was." He said, "Tony Anthony's partner walked out tonight." And he said, "We got a spot. We need somebody tomorrow night in Evansville." I said, "Oh, God." I said, "Jeff, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm making pretty good money just working independents down here, or
mhm,
outlaws. I still call it outlaws." And he said, "Well, we'll give you this. We'll guarantee you." I said, "Well, what do you guarantee me?" He told me, and I said, "Well, that's not a whole lot." And he said, "Well, it could be better." I said, "Well, I've heard that a lot of times, but you got my best friend sitting beside you, and I ain't been anywhere with him in a while, and I'll be in Evansville tomorrow night, and we'll see how this works out." So I went, and I had a blast. First night I drove, of course. I came back. We got the Congress Inn in Nashville, if you've ever heard of it. It is the dive of dives. Uh, I mean, it was pitiful. And Gossett and me were there, and then this kid, Rockin' Randy, and some other guy were there, and I don't remember. There's some guys that were working for him. So we just ended up, I mean, I had fun with them. And after the first night, I rode with Jeff, so I didn't have any trans, which was good. And that was kayfabe era. So, and I was working with Jeff, but I didn't. Jeff said, "Don't worry about it." My dad owns territory. My granddaddy's the head stooge, and so Frank Morrell drove. He was the referee. I rode beside Frank. Jeff and Ronnie Gossett were in the back seat, and we had a blast for weeks. We just have. I mean, it was fun. But it was Memphis on Monday, Louisville on Tuesday, Evansville on Wednesday, a spot show on Thursday. Friday morning, I got up, flew to Dallas, did TV Friday night in Dallas, or did the house show Friday night in Dallas, TV Saturday morning in Dallas, flew straight back to Nashville, wrestled Nashville Saturday night, spot show on Sunday, started over on Monday. I mean, it was, it was killer. It was death. It was like, but it was fun because Ronnie was there. I'm going to tell you, I would lay down at night and my face would throb from laughing so hard. That was worth it, man. Laughter is a great medicine. Even the proverbs tell you that. And I had a blast. I was still, drinking. I was still using some, and I still had my habits, and so I needed to make a little more money, I guess, to support me and my wife and my habits. But I stayed a while, and it was good. I had enjoyed it. Jeff Jarrett, I talked to Jeff just a few days, maybe 2 weeks ago, just by text. We text each other a few times a year, and his daughter goes to Berry College, right down from me, about an hour from me, and he passes through here. So he told me the other day, he said, "I'm gonna call you one day, and we're gonna catch up." I said, "Okay," but that kid was, of course, he was raised in the business, but back then, I told people, I said, he's a genius. And he's a good, and he can work, And so I liked him, and we had fun, and he's the only person that ever become a major star that still acknowledges our friendship. So if somebody wants to knock him, they can knock him. I'm probably going to Iowa this year. They're putting him in the Hall of Fame up there, for the Luthez and gosh, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I was planning on going anyway because Bobby Simmons wants to go, and Jerry Briscoe, he hadn't seen Jerry in a long time, so he wants to go see Jerry. And Bobby's probably not going to drive, so me and my wife are probably going to drive and carry him up there. But when I found out that's putting Jeff in the Hall of Fame, and you know what? I really enjoyed watching it. I watched the podcast where Jerry Briscoe came on there. He was legitimately moved by it. You could tell it. And so anyway, I like.
Yeah, I saw the announcement on Twitter that he's being in, and I've interacted with him once or twice. I think he's a really good guy, and I love his show. And Jarrett was one of the, to me, he was just super talented all the time. And online, of course, the internet wrestling fans, they're always criticizing him and stuff like that. And to me, I mean, I was a fan of his really early on. You know what I mean?
He was good.
Yeah,
his working ring was good. When I was there, I mean, we were having some great matches. I loved working with him. And I mean, in Dallas, we had a deal where Billy Travis carried the guitar. Jeff didn't. Jeff didn't do the guitar. Billy did. So we hit Billy and Jeff with it. Ronnie snuck around and got the guitar one night, and we busted it over. I think it was Jeff's head. And we had a riot in Dallas, a sportatorium. I mean, the cops had to get us out of the building, and they took us to the old Cadillac. And the old woman that was driving the car, she had bald tires, and I said, "Hit the gas." And if we hit one of them potholes and it busts a tire, don't stop. I mean, because people were seriously trying to hurt us.
Yeah,
and they hated Ronnie especially, but they hated what we did that night.
Yeah.
So it was,
Yep.
It was good.
Yeah. I have a couple more questions. This one, I came across a match online of you working one of my all-time favorites. 1990, you worked Brad Armstrong. Brad was amazing. Yes, 5-star wrestling. Yeah. Brad was an amazing competitor, professional wrestler. My friend and I always talk about him. And I mean, this match was awesome. Seriously. You
Thank
know,
you.
Brad, anytime you would watch Brad, he was incapable of having a bad moment in the ring. Really.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. Brad was, I met Brad in Georgia.
Mhm.
Bob was kind of halfway booking a little, and Brad was really, me and Brad were like almost a year, just a year apart. So I was putting the ring up and, doing whatever. I was a scrub, as they'd say. I'd do anything they wanted. It didn't matter. And Brad was in the main events. And so, but he was just so good, so nice, and we were friends. Tommy Pritchard was there at that time. And let's see, who else was it? There's another guy, I can't remember. Saint John, but it wasn't Michael.
Michael St. John.
No,
Michael St.
that's announcer Michael, but it was
Oh,
Brian St. John.
oh, okay, okay.
I don't know where else he ever worked, but he was there. So we kind of when I'd get to work, sometimes I'd get to work with Tom Pritchard or Brian St. John or Brad sometime in the spot shows, when I'd get to work, or Luke Graham or somebody. But that was about the extent of my wrestling in the spots in the house shows. But Brad was just so nice. And so we were always friends. I mean, we everywhere we were ever at, he was just good people. And him and my wife were buddies. He thought he loved Tracy. So when the weird thing is, I got down there. You know, I'll be honest with you. There's some years that I don't remember all the details. I got pretty out there for a while. Uh, that was during one of those times, the 5 star. To my recollection, uh, Buck Robley booked me out there. Now they tell me that Grizzly Smith and his family owned it. I don't know that. I guess that's true because Robin was there, Sam was there, uh, but I was thinking somebody else was bankrolling it, and Buck was working. I mean, it was booking because only reason I got there was because of Terry, because his wife Connie was worried because he was pretty out there sometime too. She wanted somebody to go with him, so Terry got me booked out there, and then Buck liked me, and I got the best uh, illegal tobacco that around, and Buck was a huge fan of that, and so he booked me regularly because of that, and then he and I like to have good matches with people. So, but that was one of my favorite matches. I worked with Junkyard Dog in that same building. That's where I met him the first time, and me and him become lifelong friends after that. But Brad was just absolutely one of the best. And when we went to Birmingham, Linda Marks started running that Wrestle Birmingham. And Ronnie West, his son, Brent, asked me to come down there and help him with the television. And I was pastoring. I was I was the associate pastor at Center Grove Baptist Church here full time. And I said, man, I don't know if I can do that. He says, yeah, well, just come one time. Dad said you would be good to help him one time. I said, okay. Well, I liked it, and I liked Linda, and she liked me. And so I sat in on a little commentary with Michael St. John. And so Linda called me and says, will you come back? I said, yeah, I guess. So she said, well, I know what Brent got you is not enough to get you back. She says, here's what I'll give you. And it was very, very fair. And I said, okay. So I came back, and then when I got down there, she says, listen, you're so good with these TVs. She said, how about helping me book, produce the TV? And I said, well, I don't want to take Brent's job. And she says, you're not going to take Brent's job. He don't want to have to put up with these guys. So you've got a different demeanor to put up with the wrestlers than Brent does. He'll put up with the production guys and the things like that. I said, okay. And so Ronnie West was the kind of guy that would just cuss you out and tell you this is the way it's going to be. That was his daddy. I loved Ronnie, but Brent was really timid. So, I helped her with it, and Brad, all the Armstrongs were there because Linda loved the Armstrongs. She only booked people she liked. One time I told her, I said, Linda, why don't you just rent a cruise ship and take all the wrestlers you like on a cruise? You would not lose any more money than you're losing running these shows. I mean,
What
it was
were
pretty
the
much,
what were the houses like for Wrestle Birmingham?
well, in Birmingham at the Zamora Shrine Temple,
Right.
we could draw 2,500 people.
Wow.
But a spot show would draw 150. And then she ran Boutwell Auditorium. It was nothing. It was awful downtown. The Zamora was a place to be, but sometimes you couldn't get to Zamora. I mean, it was so good that Jeff asked me about filming a TNA show there, because because I brought Jeff in down there a couple of times when I was booking, but it was the Armstrongs are all there. So when they just talked me into actually, I didn't do the dirty white boy thing because that was Birmingham and Tony had been there so much, and I was not going to do that out of respect to him. I just didn't think that was the thing to do. They called me Mr. Motivation,
Okay.
and I would go out and talk. I would just do commentary, but I'd do heel interviews and bring the guys out and talk. And then they wanted me to manage. Then they ended up wanting me to wrestle. But I was like a motivational speaker. I'd come out to the ring with a mic, telling people how great they were. I love you. I had all this. Let me help you. If you'll just, I can make you better people and all this. I mean, it's just goofy stuff. But it got over. And so I had the Armstrongs, all of them. And I would work with each one, building up to Bob. And but I would do interviews. I did an interview with Brad one night. I said, Bradley, I've loved you ever since you were a kid. We were both the same age. We started out together in the same territory, but your daddy was the booker, His eyes got about that big. He's like, I said, and of course you got in the main events, and guess what I did? I put up the ring, and I'd done stuff like that with all of it. I said, remember when you were a rat and a man, and all that. Remember the Dookie braids? And Brian was there that night. So him and Brad was behind the curtain at Boutwell. This was at Boutwell. And they were watching and they was dying laughing, But we would do all these matches with different people. So I loved working with Brad. And I've done it everywhere, everywhere I've been with where they were at. So when they got over there, they asked Brad who he wanted to work on TV, to get a win. And he says, they'll have a beat Jimmy. And I said, well, it better be. So, I even told him what finish to use. He said, how you want me to beat you? So, I remember that all came back to me when I watched it the other day. I remembered all that stuff. But Brad was one of the best guys in the business. Bob was absolutely just as good. Scott was a great guy. Me and Steve wasn't that close. I didn't know him as well. And Brian later on seemed like a really good guy. I booked him in Russell, Birmingham and worked with him. I actually worked a deal angle with him one night down there, where he did the pump out slam on me and did some stuff, make him look, I just went out there and sold for him. But he was always very nice too. And
that's what I've heard.
They're the best family. They're just great people. They were great. And I got to meet finally after 30 years, I guess, I got to meet Miss Gail, their mother. And I had never met her. And she said, well, I've heard a lot about you. And I said, well, I always wondered if you were real. But no, she was sweet too. They're the sweetest family, man.
So what are you up to today?
Today, I am the pastor at Harbor Lights Baptist Church, where I've been serving for 19 years.
Wow.
Yeah, I was in a business full time. I was bivocational pastor there for the first part of my tenure, for most of my tenure. A couple of years ago, I owned a business, a wholesale retail business that I had for 30 years. And a company came by and wanted to buy it. And I hadn't planned on selling it quite so early. I'm 62. I thought I'd be a few more years, but I think it was God's will. And I sold it, and he took very good care of me. It was nothing I could do. I can't take credit for it. It just happened. And now I'm their pastor full-time without them having to worry about paying a full-time pastor. It's never been about the money. So, I'm seeing people grow. I had a young man just today that that I'm able to invest and sow into his life, and he's seen his life changed, from even just all kind, just the world, just a mess, And he's 17, and he stood up with me today in church and told the church how God was working in his life. So I do a men's Bible study called Man Church with Rick Burgess hosts that thing but I lead it every week on Tuesday nights. We have about 25, 30 guys from just in town. Some of them don't even go to church anywhere else. They just come there. So I'm having a good time, and I've got a 4-month-old granddaughter who is spending the night with us tonight. So I'm excited.
My granddaughter is 1 month old. Well, she lives in Florida, so now I got to make a trip to Florida at some point.
Yeah.
And your pastor, I just went to church for the first time in 30 years this past July, and then I got baptized August 31st, 2025. So I gave my life recently to Christ.
Good. It's the best thing you ever done.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, it's amazing to me. I know. See, I give my life to Christ and left wrestling 6 months later, and I had people can knock to me a lot about that, And it's funny. Tommy one time told me, he says, "Yeah, you got that religion." He said, "You'll be back. Everybody comes back." And I saw him a couple of years ago, and he said, "You never did come back, Jimbo." I said, "No, I didn't." But matter of fact, I'm gonna see him next month. I'm gonna meet him in Dalton. I think he's gonna be over here doing some kind of meet and greet. But
He came
it's
up here a few years ago for a meet and greet, and was wearing a D Road shirt, and that just sparked a conversation with him. Of course, he before he ended up being like 10 minutes late because he was at the liquor store next door getting some beer. So
really,
he said, "We got to hold on. He's in the he's getting some beer next door. Then he'll be in." I mean, but I got to tell you, he was probably the coolest guy to sit there and talk his career with.
yeah. Tommy's a good guy. I've known Tommy a long, long time, and his mom even. I had a relationship with her. She's still alive, but I haven't seen her in 30 years probably. But I loved her when I was young. I spent the night on her couch a couple of times. Um, but he's good people. Terry's his wife, wonderful. She's sweet as she can be, and man, she's got to be. She's like my wife. She's got to be an angel and a saint for putting up with us. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Well, I want to say thank you for joining me here today. I really appreciate you getting to talk about your wrestling career.
Well,
On
thank
this,
you.
yeah,
I have a. I don't get a lot of opportunities to talk about wrestling. My wife hated it for years, and I understand why. I was married. We got married. I wrestled 7 more years before the Lord got a hold of me. And so she's been a wonderful wife. She put up with 7 years of hell, and I'm thankful that she put up with me that long. And I've tried to make it up to her ever since. But she's absolutely amazing, and I got two great daughters, and so I don't get a lot of this opportunities. And I'm always amazed when somebody even wants to talk to me about it. But I'm very thankful. I do not regret it. The wrestling business is what my life was built on. Uh, I'm anchored in Jesus, but the experiences of life where I'm able to help a lot of people today came out wrestling. And it never amazes me when somebody's having problems because I've been there and I've been through them. So I can see that all those life lessons God used and turned into good. So I'm very thankful. Thank you for having me.
well, thank you, and maybe we'll have to have you back sometime.
There's plenty to talk about. Take care.